Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to continue with our panel, Experiences of the Entrepreneurial University. The purpose of this panel is to present different experiences of this university in the fields of entrepreneurship and innovation. Despite having similarities, they have unique characteristics. We are going to hear experiences from Latin America, Africa, and Europe, and we see how the concept of this university was deployed in these different regions. Our first speaker is Professor Juan Fernan Muñoz Rodriguez from the National University of San Marcos in Peru. Juan, it is a pleasure to welcome you here.
The University of San Marcos is
A Universidade Nacional de São Marcos
of America Universities. I have an index that have
esse é o índice
national university presentations,
que, onde eu listo os meus tópicos, a Universidade Nacional de São Marcos, o lançamento do Triple Hélice, os membros, a universidade é membro do THA, o capítulo do Peru THA, o Triple Helix, a Universidade Nacional, o governo regional de Tacna e países vizinhos, como, por exemplo, o Equador e próximos passos. Então, a Universidade Nacional Maior de San Marcos foi criado em 1551, e temos, então, centenas de anos de existência. São 5 blocos de estudos: estudos da saúde, ciências básicas, engenharia, economia e gestão, humanidades, direito, ciências sociais. 20 faculdades, 66 diferentes cursos, 35 mil alunos, 5 mil alunos pós-graduandos, 3 mil professores, 34 cursos de doutorado, 127 programas de mestrado. Em San Marcos, temos 1.551 incubadores para empresas inovadoras na Universidade Nacional de São Marcos, que, então, aumenta a inovação e o empreendedorismo, conectando todos os atores. Em 2018 foi o lançamento, se eu não me engano. O engenheiro Martín Vizcarra Cornejo representou o governo. Também estava presente o reitor da Universidade Nacional de São Marcos, Universidade Nacional, Dr. Oreste Cachay Bossa, participando como componente da academia. E o presidente da Confiep, Dr. Roque Benavides Ganossa, representando, então, as empresas e a sociedade civil. É por isso que, em outubro de 2018, nós lançamos, então, a Triple Hélice Peru. Aqui, os 3 representando o governo, empresa e sociedade. Bom, a Universidade de São Marcos é membro do THA. Uma solicitação do grupo de professores da incubadora 1551, em maio de 2019, a universidade definiu sua participação como membro desse THA. No final de 2019, na conferência que foi realizada na África do Sul, seguindo solicitação do reitor da Universidade, Dr. Orestes Cachai-Bosa, a formação do capítulo Peru do TH foi, então, pedido e a Universidade foi quem liderou esse movimento. A pandemia, a Covid-19, resultou numa escassez de fundos de financiamento e, como tal, a realocação do TH localizado de 2020 para o Centro Tecnológico Biomédico e de Pesquisa Ambiental. Foi criado em 2014, o primeiro centro de excelência criado pela uma iniciativa do Conselho Nacional Peruano de Ciência e Tecnologia e liderado pela Universidade Nacional de San Marcos. Por que houve essa seleção? Porque queríamos unir e o setor acadêmico, nós precisaríamos disso para realizarmos as coisas que queríamos e dar prosseguimento ao nosso trabalho. Então, temos a Associação Nacional de Universidades Públicas do Peru, a Associação Nacional de Universidades Públicas do Peru, que é o ANUP. Então, nós fizemos uma apresentação conjunta aos reitores, membros da ANUP, e eles ficaram muito satisfeitos que entramos para o THA e, para esse fim, determina quais são as universidades que trabalham com empresas e definem seus índices e tem um programa de TH com algumas universidades. Enquanto isso, estamos fazendo com a região de Tacna, está ao lado de países Chile, Bolívia e Chile. Em paralelo, a Universidade de São Marcos assinou um acordo quadro com o governo regional de Tacna e com a Universidade Nacional Jorge Basadre de Tacna. E temos esse acordo específico para criar uma unidade tripla hélice no governo regional de Tacna. Temos um grupo de empresas chamado Sofra Tacna. É uma força que tem muitas coisas, muitas empresas. É por isso que estávamos buscando uma Enquanto isso, estamos trabalhando com outro país, com o Equador, e vamos realizar uma conferência tripla hélice. E é por isso que queremos atender às estratégias no Equador e fazer o necessário para atender essas exigências. Agora, CITBEN é, como eu lhes disse, o Centro de Pesquisa Tecnológica, Biomédica, e é por isso que agora estamos conjuntamente trabalhando com muitas empresas que trabalham em muitas coisas para atender às empresas peruanas. Muito obrigado por sua atenção. Essa foi apenas uma conferência breve que eu preparei para vocês. Obrigado. Francisco, essa foi minha palestra.
Vamos passar na sequência.
Let us now move on to our next guest, Professor Thiago Renault from the Federal University, Rural Federal University of the state of Rio de Janeiro. Professor Renault, it's a pleasure to welcome you here. Good afternoon. Can you hear me well? So I'd like to begin by greeting my colleagues here in the panel and also greet everyone who's out there listening to us. Professor Thiago Renault from the Federal University. I can hear.
Tradução. Eu devo ouvir também, não?
Should I be hearing the translation? No.
Então, gente, o meu trabalho,
So,
da Universidade Federal Rural
my work, despite working in the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro, is work that I did in Portugal at the University of Aveiro. And I was studying a Portuguese innovation program, more specifically in the University of Aveiro within the context of research innovation and Portuguese. In our study, we used the triple helix approach, but we also used innovation system approach also. I don't know whether my colleagues have followed up on this, but the ecosystem, once a lot was spoken about entrepreneurship, but more recently, we have heard the term innovation ecosystems. I particularly like this term, namely because when we include the term ecosystem, we can provide a unique character to the different experiences. Each experience, and oftentimes the players may even repeat themselves, but the way they interact, that cultural melting pot, is all very unique and differentiated, which is the case of the University of Aveiro. And by studying Brazilian cases in the past and other universities worldwide. So our work had this approach, followed this approach, academic innovation system approach, although the university has quite a limited role in this process. It's important, undoubtedly, but the university per se can do very little on its own. And what has drawn my attention and caught my eye is the participation of peripheral countries like the Brazilian case or Portuguese language, the way the public policies can be implemented in these innovation segments. And oftentimes we end up following a rather linear approach. We care very much for the research and scientific environment. We are unable to attract, to engage, so to speak, the entrepreneurial segment to these activities. And I joke about the Brazilian case. When you see a company involved in an ecological park and investing, they're either former state-owned companies. It's very difficult to see a 100% private company investing in this sort of field. With regard to Portugal is an interesting country. It's within Europe. It is part of the OECD. and it has comparative data, public policies in Portugal, and they can do these comparisons, and we don't see that in the Brazilian case. The Brazilian system, Portugal is below average, but it has improved. And with regard to higher education and science, it is able to maintain itself at an average level. So both indicators were below average, and it managed to continue developing its innovation, or rather research system and university. But the innovation in dynamic systems, in dynamic sectors, in companies, Portugal was unable to achieve this. So the scenario there is they are good in producing knowledge, but not so good in transforming this knowledge into economic value and innovation. Portugal is not a very industrialized country. This may be another characteristic that we can use to compare with the Brazilian case. So they jump from agriculture, from farming to the service sector. If I'm not mistaken, only 14% of the Portuguese GDP comes from from industry. And within industry, the strong sectors in Portugal are not of technology. That's not their profile. With regard to public policies for innovation, the Portuguese case is quite similar to other peripheral countries. Two-thirds of the monies invested in research and development by the private sector come from fiscal benefits. The main Portuguese tool to support innovation is tax exemptions and comparing to developed countries. And in Portugal, like other developing countries, it has a very broad, a wide spread of public policies so that universities can get involved in the innovation process. I'd like to highlight three examples. First of all, one is called Collab. The government supports private companies to hold joint labs with universities. It's similar to Embrapi, but comparing to the Brazilian case, but it has more of a physical rationale, where the physical facility, where the equipment. And they also have university technology entrepreneurship network. They have an agreement with the university in Austin, in Texas, and the MIT, if I'm not mistaken, and all the technology transfer office managers in Portugal had the opportunity of being trained in the US at the offices of technology transfer from these universities that I mentioned. So this is an interesting program for entrepreneurs in Portugal. Obviously, the universities increased enormously the number of patents, and that would happen in Brazilian case. The highest Portuguese patents are some universities, which is quite strange, because in a normal situation, only companies would be at the top of this list. And they have another program for startup vouchers. The companies get vouchers to promote their first year, to help them kick off a feasible business model and go to market, and then they receive another voucher to participate in Portuguese incubators. And so public policies are similar to what we observe in Brazil, more specifically in the region of Aveiro. It is located between Coimbra, which is the oldest Portuguese educational center, perhaps even one of the oldest in Europe, 1200 something. And on the other side, the city of Porto, which is the most industrialized city in Portugal and the region also. And Aveiro is located smack in the middle of this. And since it is a neutral city and it's in the middle, it holds the headquarters of Portugal's postal services. And so telegraphs were located in this city, and thus PT, the telecom, Portuguese telecom company, was also headquartered that was located in this city. And given this advance, the technological advance with telegraph and then with telephony and then mobiles, there was a demand to create a university in this region. And thus, the interest of creating the University of Aveiro, given this regional demand, a very dynamic, historically, many companies from the sector are located around this, and more specifically, a company, Petit Innovation.
This belongs to Portugal Telecom Company, but it's yet another company. And this was the company that actually invented the prepaid cell phone. This was something that came out specifically from that region. And when we look at the university, we see that it does have a technological park with focus on information technology, new materials, and the agro-industrial area. It is curious because when I was there, I could see this. PP Telecom was purchased by a French company, then PT Innovation in turn was bought by a Netherlands company, and the whole chain was disarticulated. In other words, one of them is not within the university park anymore. In fact, the university park is trying to bring in something new, something different from this historical approach. However, this historic approach is still being followed. But the great success for this incubator was SAP.PT. This was the very first incubated company at the university, SAP.PT. So it's not really different from other cases. The university has an incubator in the 90s. Then in the beginning of the 20s, they create an office for technology transfer. And then 5 to 8 years after this, the university starts thinking about creating a technology park and innovation agency to try to centralize these things. The Aveiro University is a little bit different from other Portuguese universities. It is actually a foundation, so all of their projects have a very high overhead. So the teachers have to hunt literally 50% of the salaries out in the market, which is very, very different from the situation of other public universities, where the teachers are not as hungry to get projects because their financial side is supported. And then to conclude, and I'd like to raise this for debate, is this issue. First of all, this innovation academic ecosystems. Should we advance this? Or maybe we can think about uh, ecological only. And another point, which is very important, is this. All of those successful cases that I saw and those which were not successful, they have one thing in common. history brings a lot. The history will explain very much the current situation and the current experience. In the case of the Aveiro University, we can go back to the 50s when the very first telecom group was created over there, just like the Rio de Janeiro University. We can go back to the 60s to think about the research center, CENPES, and so on. In other words, history tells a lot. There's also the perspective from the private sector. When you think about the government or state-owned companies, it is possible to work. Conflicts are not generated. So it does not seem to me that the conflict is not this relationship between university and the company, but it would be more between what is public and what is private. In other words, how can the private sector appropriate or own what has been produced by the public sector? And the final point in my presentation, I'd like to emphasize the importance for these arrangements to really work, how important it is for them to be involved in large global value chains. Because when you are in those large value chains, in oil, for example, these arrangements will take place in a specific way. There is enough attractiveness to attract small companies, big companies, and the government. However, when you have an arrangement that is not involved with dynamic chains, when it's very much spread out with different sectors and the starting point is technology and not the market, they do have one thing in common. And this is something that you really realize. The paradox is that the scientific portion of the project is developed, but you do not have the entrepreneurial part as developed to play together and take that knowledge and bring it to the market. This is it. I only had 15 minutes. I'd love to say more, but I'm going to stop here. Thank you again for this invitation. Great pleasure to be here with you. Thank you.
Obrigado, Thiago, pela
Thank you,
apresentação.
Thiago, for your
Muito
presentation.
interessante.
Very
Vamos dar
interesting.
sequência aí
Now
com
we
o
shall give the
professor
floor to
Onesmus. É, Thank you, Professor Onesmus,
Professor Onesmus Muroki
for your
Thuo.
participation. And
He's speaking English in the room. You can
now
hear, Professor.
it's your presentation, please.
You have the floor. Thank you, Thiago, for your presentation. Very interesting. Now we shall give the floor. Eu estou me ouvindo, Verônica. Fecha aí, fecha o seu.
Okay, it's my turn now.
Yes, your turn now.
Professor Sim.
Okay, good evening, everyone.
Boa tarde a todos.
Yes, sadly, like I said, I do not have any
Infelizmente,
Portuguese
como eu
background,
disse,
so
eu não
I have the
tenho.
floor, and I'll
Jean,
use English, and I hope, of course, the translation must be going on, right? So my name is Onesmus from Kenya. I'm a professor of political economics of education. I also am currently chairing a committee within the
Já,
university
a Lúcia está
on
dizendo que
the
está se ouvindo.
establishment of the Kenyatta University Science and Technology Park. I am also a private entrepreneur, and I run partly on the side a technology and innovation interface. You know, it's more or less a private triple helix where inclusive and grassroots innovation happens to be at the core of it, empowering the youth on how innovations can be deployed for to solve problems of a third world country. And of course, there are many: disease, access to cheap energy, sanitation, transport, ICT, and so on and so forth, so that they can reach those who, who may have the least means of access to it. At the university, I am an economist. I teach economics of education, but I also specialize on matters to do with science, technology, and innovation. And in fact, my doctoral thesis was on the interface between government, industry, and universities. There's a so-called triple helix, but within the context of the manufacturing sector, given the emphasis it has in our development agenda. It is indeed a privilege to be part of the fourth GEUM, and my entry point into this discussion, because what we are trying to do is sharpen a metric system, a measurement system that will help continue
Sistema
consolidate
que
and
vai
deepen
ajudar a
conversations
continuar
around
a
the triple
consolidar
helix. Now it's even become the quadra-helix.
a
One of the
tudo em torno da
one of
hélice tríplice e até mesmo agora a
Maybe
hélice.
your translation is turned on.
Eu acho que já tinha resolvido. Não, Jean, já tinha resolvido já.
YouTube translations is turned on or turned off in your
Sistema que vai ajudar a continuar a consolidar
Professor Onesmus,
yes, please.
tudo em
Yeah.
torno.
your YouTube, your link with the translation in YouTube, is it open? Yeah. Could you close it, please? Because your microphone is mute.
Do you want me to close YouTube?
Yeah. Are you watching in YouTube too?
No, I'm not watching in YouTube. I'm just speaking directly into Zoom, into this link.
Okay. So your YouTube link is not opened.
I had opened it. Can I reopen? Can I refresh it?
No. We suggest you to close it because
yes.
You had sent a link, Mariana, httpn net e4me ivum tradução, no? No, I'm not watching in YouTube. I'm in this room.
okay, you are not with YouTube opened. So
So you want me to click on it again?
no.
No.
So can I continue then?
Yes.
Yeah, because we are having some trouble with the sound, but if you are not
okay.
with YouTube
So
open, it's okay.
Would you like me to continue?
Yes. You can continue.
Okay. So I wanted to
Eu
emphasize that
queria
the
enfatizar
growth of the triple helix, concept as a way of
o crescimento
helping,
desse
contribute to the
conceito de
conversation
hélice
on
tríplice,
the metric, the discussion about the metric,
justamente toda
is
essa
how
discussão de
the
métrica
history of a
é
university
como a
or the university
história
system and its
do
relationship
sistema
with
de
with its
investimento,
environment,
sua
in this case the
relação com
government
seu
and the private
ambiente,
sector,
neste
is
caso
important.
governo e setor privado, quanto isto é
Kenyatta University,
importante.
as one of the public
A
universities,
Universidade
in fact, the
Kennyata
second
é
public
uma das nossas
university,
universidades
second public
públicas. Na
university,
realidade, a
was
nossa
established
segunda
in
universidade
the
pública,
concept of
e foi
a
estabelecida
development
no
university. A development
conceito
university means
de
that
universidade
one
de
of its
desenvolvimento. O
core
que isso
mandates
significa?
is to contribute to the
Significa que
development
uma das
agenda.
suas
Of course,
comandatos é
mostly
o
started from a teaching
desenvolvimento.
university and just a little bit of research, but not research that is overtly linked to solving practical problems yet. The only link to the environment at that point in time was manpower development. You are developing manpower, so it's a teaching university that is developing capacity for developing manpower, so that the so-called Africanization agenda, because of course we were coming from colonialism, so there was need to replace the living expatriates with the locals. So our roots as a teaching university was largely linked to development of manpower. But of course, as pressing problems continued, and then there was gradual appreciation of the need for locally developed research solutions to those problems, then we see the research mandate beginning to grow within universities, and development of capacity of university staff to conduct research.
O
And so, of
desenvolvimento
course,
da
you also have the
capacidade
growth
para
of the
o
comprehensive
pessoal da
university.
universidade
The growth of the
fazer
comprehensive
a
university, meaning
pesquisa.
that
Ou
you now
seja,
have wider specializations,
agora você tem uma
from
especialização
engineering, from
mais
health sciences, from
ampla da
agricultural sciences,
engenharia, das
humanities,
ciências
and technology, and so on and so
humanas,
forth, right? With the growth
tecnologias
of
e
those
assim por
disciplines,
diante.
the growth
Com o
of
crescimento
academic staff
dessas
to drive,
disciplinas,
those
com o
disciplines,
crescimento de
and
todo o
the
staff
development of
acadêmico para essas
postdoctoral
disciplinas e todo
capacity,
o
then
desenvolvimento da
gradually
capacidade
you
de
have the research function
pós-graduação.
beginning to develop. And that also led to the growth of both comprehensive but also specialized universities. Comprehensive universities within an institution, but also separate universities. So you have an Egerton University focusing on agriculture. You have Jomo Kenyatta University of Technology, Agriculture and Technology, Moi University with a specialization on technology. So the point I'm trying to make is that part of the development of the university system becomes the history of the development of a university in terms of its how the country defines it becomes one of the important metrics in the in our discussion on in GUEM in this context. But of course, other than that, then you also have the growth of appreciation of what my friend Thiago talked about, the national innovation system. So you now also have a country that grows in appreciation of what exactly the role of the university can be in terms of providing innovations through research that can solve its problems. So even if that growth may not have happened concurrently, but you have now an increasing appreciation of within the triple helix itself, the government increasingly developing an appreciation of what universities can do. And since in our context the government has largely been the dominant player in the triple helix, then the appreciation initially came from government because of course like Thiago said, it has the finances, it drives the development agenda, but immediately that appreciation began to grow, then you have more resources, you have more policy incentives increasingly being directed that way, right? And then when we came to the 80s and 90s and the role of government began, questions on the role of government began being raised by the World Bank and so on and so forth, and you have debates on reducing the size of government and the growth of the private sector through liberalization, globalization, and therefore the entry of a lot of multinationals, a lot of shedding off of government interests to the private sector, then we have seen the growth of the private sector. Of course, that private sector, even though it has been largely multinational in origin, but we have a growing local component of that. Why I make that point is because a lot of innovations that provide solutions to multinationals have happened to come from outside. But as you have the local content of economic activity happening within local players, then you now have seen the appreciation of the role of universities growing in providing solutions to local issues. So my second point in my contribution was that as the relative roles of members in the triple helices continues to evolve, that should also provide us with another source of indicator of how to appreciate the triple helix, the evolution of triple helix in various contexts. The third one now, of course, can zero in into institution have just focused a little bit on the history, I focused on a little bit of the context, but the third one, now I'll contextualize it within my university. And Kenyatta University now has grown from, an offshoot of a faculty of the first university, which was the University of Nairobi. It came from University of Nairobi into what was previously a British barracks that was a gift to the first president. And then the first president then facilitated its growth by having the first faculty, the Faculty of Education, be transferred to the site. So it started as a Faculty of Education and has largely been known as a university whose comparative strength has been in education. But since the 2000 and so on, we have seen growth into now we have courses into arts, humanities, sciences. Now we have moved into healthcare, we have moved into engineering. So you have the growth of an institution from a largely, dominantly a faculty-based or just focusing on education and servicing humanities, social sciences and sciences in developing of teachers to now a comprehensive university as we understand it. But also, we have also seen within the institution the growth from teaching to research and now to what it is largely is a largely entrepreneurial university. So I can now begin to focus more on its entrepreneurial components by talking about the role of leadership, institutional leadership, vision, and strategic plan, just how the governance and management of an institution is a useful metrics in terms of how a university can evolve into an entrepreneurial one. Because the third vice chancellor of the university, who Professor Etzkowitz had the opportunity to meet, when he had the notion, when he had the mention of entrepreneurial, of course, Professor Etzkowitz had come with a team, and when we had a triple helix conference here in Nairobi, and it surprised him that there is a clear mention of entrepreneurial university. So he was very interested in finding out how that came about. And so my point there being that the third vice chancellor of the university had a very clear vision of the university becoming very consciously involved in providing an environment, both in terms of staff incentives, both in terms of development of infrastructure, where practical solutions through innovations are provided for pressing local problems. And that's so the gradual institutionalization of the entrepreneurial concept in the university strategic plan. So you have the strategic plan making overt mention of entrepreneurial university, but then that boiled down to specific strategies and activities. One of them was the formation of the Directorate of University Industry Linkages, whereas previously you had individual faculty from the sciences, from agriculture, having their own individualized interactions with industry. So you have people who are coming from industry, from the paint industry that they have, and they want to approach individual staff. Then you have the movement, or you have the university institutionalizing that by forming a directorate that crystallizes those interactions. And so even if it's not necessarily a formal technology transfer office, the initial phase was just formalizing those relationships through a directorate. And that directorate gradually evolved into what is now called the Chandaria Innovation and Incubation Center. So you have now an incubation center where you have boot camps, you have innovation competitions being advertised, and you have players coming from out there who think they want to have some incubation space, mentorship by faculty inside those places, seed money being provided by manufacturing, consultancies being provided to the incubation center by, by local and international players coming into the incubation center to provide that. So my third point was that, my fourth point being that in the course of deepening our discussions about innovation metrics, the role of an institutional leadership, a strategic plan, but also institutional strategies that institutionalize the concept. And that has happened through not just infrastructure and also seed money, but also building capacity of faculty to provide mentorship, but also to interact with industry within that environment. And you have now more players from industry coming to seek for solutions in that. That has ballooned now to big projects where the university has been now a host of international players who want to, invest in, say, energy, solar energy, setting solar energy plants, where a school, where you have a school that develops local capacity of students, in solar power, solar energy, and so on and so forth, and the establishment of a pilot power plant hosted within the university. Then you also have the government committing funds to set up a pharmacological center where indigenous medicine is processed, microbes dealt with, the poisonous components of microbes isolated through quality control, and then packaging of those indigenous solutions into feeding into the country's healthcare system. So you have a sustainable Medicare system originating from innovations. And those innovations are also because, we have a vibrant intellectual property unit where the intellectual property unit looks for opportunities to commercialize innovations by faculty. So again, you have structures. One of the other contributions is the development of structure, an intellectual property regime that helps in safeguarding innovations by scholars and innovations from their research, and looking for opportunities to commercialize them. So because I could say much, and of course some of this you'll find in my presentation when I put it in PowerPoint, I think the 5 areas in which I want, in terms of this discussion, one, the role of an institution's history, where it is originating from, in terms of the relationship between the higher education system and the innovation ecosystem. And then 2, the appreciation of the roles of the individual players in the triple helix, on the role of the triple helix. What can each player and then does each of the helices appreciate the role of each other? And sometimes, as I've pointed out, in some cases the growth of the private sector has been a later addition. And the third area, of course, within the institution, in terms of leadership, in terms of strategy, development of a strategic plan, in terms of specific projects within the strategic plan, and so on and so forth. So thank you very much, and it's a privilege to be part of you.
Thank you, Onesmus.
Muito obrigado,
Vamos passar então para a próxima
Onesmus.
apresentação, que será feita
Let us
pelo
now go on to
meu
our
ex-colega
next
da
presentation that
Universidade
will
Federal
be
do Rio de
made
Janeiro,
by my former
atualmente
colleague
reitor
from
da
the
FAPER,
Federal
que é o
University.
Mauricio
He
Guedes,
is
que
the
participou aí da
Director of
criação,
Technology
fundação
at FAPERJ,
do
Mr.
parque,
Professor Mauricio
da
Guedes, who took
incubadora,
part
tem uma série de
in the
experiências aí
creation
na
of
área.
the park and of the
Maurício,
incubator. He's very
prazer estar com
experienced
você
in
aqui.
this area. So, Mauricio, it is
Obrigado,
really a
Francisco. É um
pleasure to
prazer
have
estar
you
aqui. Queria
here.
agradecer
Thank you so much,
o
Francisco.
convite, saudar todos os
It
que
is
estão
a
participando
pleasure to be here. Thank you for
dessa
this
sessão,
invitation. I'd like
os
to
que estão
greet
nos ouvindo.
everyone who is in the panel and all those who are listening to us. Can you hear me well? Okay. So greetings to the audience, to the organizers, Marisa Almeida, Branca Terra, and also Professor Henry. It was a pleasure for me to see the three of them during the opening session yesterday. I was asked to speak about the creation of the Technology Park at the Federal University in Rio. So I'm going to make a brief presentation, and then I'm going to make some comments about this experience that
Estou localizando aqui um instantinho que já vou localizar. Está aberto. Estranho. Ah, apareceu. Estão vendo a
can you see?
apresentação?
Can you see the presentation?
Eu acho que eu não consigo colocar agora.
Agora
Vendo?
sim.
Agora sim, né? Então, um pouquinho sobre a UFRJ, a Universidade Federal do Rio de Janeiro. Os portugueses, quando descobriram o Brasil, proibiram que houvesse na colônia cursos universitários.
A little bit about the Federal University
No caso do Peru,
in
foi
Rio de
Fernando
Janeiro,
que criou a
as
Universidade
opposed
do
to the
Ensino
case in
Superior.
Peru.
No Brasil era proibido ter ensino
In
superior.
Brazil, it
Até que as
was,
forças
you
de
weren't
Napoleão
allowed until
resolveram invadir a
Napoleon's
França e,
forces decided
chegando
to
perto de
invade
Lisboa,
France,
o rei de Portugal
and
resolveu fugir para a colônia,
the
para o Brasil com a família.
King of Portugal decided
Assim,
to
de 15.000 pessoas que
run
vieram
off
Portugal
to
para o
Brazil
Brasil,
with
em
about
1808,
15,000
e
people.
essas pessoas e os jovens tinham que ter acesso ao
And
ensino superior. Então,
so
foram
the
criadas
young
três
youth had to have
escolas
access
iniciais que
to
deram
higher
origem,
education. And so
foram
three
as raízes,
schools
digamos, da Universidade
were created.
Federal do Rio de
The
Janeiro.
ones
Uma
that,
escola de engenharia, uma escola
the
de
engineering
medicina e uma
school,
escola
School of
de
Engineering,
direito.
School of Medicine, and the
A
School of
universidade,
Law.
porém, foi constituída
The
na forma
university
de
was
universidade formalmente
constituted
apenas em
formally as
1920.
such only in
É a maior
1920.
universidade
It is the
federal
largest federal
do
university
país, uma
in the
das
country,
mais
one of
conceituadas em
the
vários
most renowned
aspectos, né? Aí estão os números, eu não vou ler para vocês.
universities,
Temos
and
60.000 estudantes entre graduação
there are
e
over,
pós-graduação. É uma universidade de grande porte.
it's a big
que tem
university, and
muitas áreas na cidade do
there
Rio de
are
Janeiro,
many
e
areas
cidades
in the
próximas
city of Rio de
do
Janeiro.
estado. O principal campus da UFRJ é essa ilha,
This is the campus, the main campus
Rio de Janeiro,
on
ilha
the
do Fundão,
Fundão
tem formato
Island.
parecido com as
It
praias de Ipanema e Leblon
Its
juntas, e a
format
praia de
is
Copacabana,
very
por exemplo.
similar to
Tem uma
the
área
format
similar
of
na área
Copacabana
de
Beach
Copacabana. São
or the
4
beaches of
milhões de
Ipanema
metros
and Leblon.
quadrados
4 million
na ilha do
square
Fundão.
meters.
Uma extensão de território muito
It's
grande,
very
e várias
large
universidades no mundo têm essa característica, e
a
várias
piece of
universidades
land.
do mundo, a começar pela Universidade de Stanford,
Many universities
aproveitaram essas
have
guerras ociosas
these
para
characteristics,
atrair
like
empresas
Stanford
e
University.
montar o que
They
se
made
chama
the most,
parque tecnológico,
took
science
advantage
park,
of all this land and to
essa é uma
build
foto
the
de
university. This is a
do
picture
ano 2000 dessa ponta da
of
ilha, né?
the year 2000 of this
Dos
tip of the
extremos da
island.
ilha. Não havia
One of
nada
the
aqui, no ano 2000
extremities,
nós
there
estávamos
was
começando
nothing in
as
2000. We were
obras
just
de
beginning
terraplanagem para a
to
implantação do parque tecnológico.
the
Essa é uma foto
earth
do mesmo local,
moving
agora em 2020.
activities.
Na
And this
verdade,
is the
ele já
same
tinha
site in
essa mesma
2020.
aparência
It
em
already had
2015, com exceção deste
this
prédio,
same view by 2015, with the exception of this
mágico, né?
cubic
Vai ser um centro de
magic
incubação
cube
e um centro
building, that
cultural
it's an
também.
incubator and a
Esse é um prédio
cultural
novo.
center.
Então, entre 2000, o
So
primeiro
between
prédio surgiu
the
em
very first
2010.
building
Então, entre 2010 e
appeared in
2015,
2010. So
quase
between
tudo isso
2010
foi
and
construído,
2015, this
vocês
was
estão vendo aqui.
practically all this was built
E
in
também
this
dois prédios nessa extensão
time,
do
and
parque,
2
que
buildings in
também faz
this
parte
point of the
da
park,
ilha do
which is
Fundão.
also
Esse é
part
o
of
centro de
the
pesquisas
Fundão
da
Island.
L'Oréal,
This
e
is
esse é o centro de
L'Oréal's
pesquisas da
research
GE,
center,
da General
and this
Electric.
is GE's research center.
segundo o ranking,
According to the Folha de São Paulo ranking,
críticas a qualquer ranking,
I have many criticism to any kind of ranking, but nonetheless, this is a renowned one in Brazil. The federal university is always ranked among the first three best and most innovative universities in Brazil. I don't know whether this is fair or not, but it is what the Folha de São Paulo said it is. So there are some labs installed in our technological park, special labs that have important relationship with companies. There is a company incubator that is managed by COPI, and where our professor Francisco also works. It was one of the first technology parks in Brazil. Many companies were created in this incubator, and there is a wide range of companies installed in this technological park. I'm sure that many of you will recognize many of these brands here. When we began planning the park, we decided to have a multi-sectorial one. It wouldn't be for just one sector, one kind of activity. And given well-known reasons here in Brazil, the oil and gas sector would be one of the... I'm going to interrupt sharing here because then I can see the other panel members. The oil and gas sector would be one of the main ones. The Federal University has enormous vocation in oil, and Rio de Janeiro produces over 70% of oil in Brazil. The Petrobras' research center is located precisely within the Federal University's campus, not within the technological park, but on the campus. So we didn't count on one thing, which was the discovery of pre-salt, a mega oil reserve that was discovered in 2007 that drew the attention of the whole world to Brazil. So in a very short period of time, we turned into one of the world's major oil players. And this was very interesting. We attracted Halliburton, Schlumberger, FMC, many companies that work in the oil. Baker Hughes, they set up their facilities in the technological park. And this drew the attention of the whole world. Houston's mayor visited the park because it was published in Houston's main newspaper that Rio de Janeiro was threatening Houston as world capital of oil technology. And so she decided to visit us to understand what was going on. But it wasn't only oil and gas. We also drew to our park GE's research, L'Oreal, which has nothing to do with oil, Ambev, the largest beer brewery in the world. The largest research center is located in our Federal University's Technology Park. And they invested over $500 million. It is an extraordinary investment. There is no plant, no factory there. They're only research centers. Everybody knows that Brazil has suffered many crises, political, economic, ethical. The price was over $100 and it dropped. plummeted. And this just stresses and reinforces the idea of diversification. We always defended that the park should not be exclusively geared toward oil. Now, moving on to some points, food for thought. Since 2000, we have worked on legislation in the field of innovation. In 2003, we saw the first law on innovation being enacted, and then many changes until we had the legal framework. And we saw an important fact, a constitutional amendment to include in the Brazilian Constitution commitment of the state with innovation, commitment to innovate, an obligation, a commitment toward the development of science and for society's well-being. But there was no word on innovation. And so this introduction
Ontem mesmo, o Senado Federal aprovou novo marco legal para as startups.
There is a new legal framework for startups. It will go back to the House of Representatives before it is forwarded to the president to be sanctioned. And so it is an environment that is in constant evolution. We faced, as you can imagine, many difficulties in order to create not only the park, but also the company incubators. And this was discussed during 8 years until we had the formal obligation to have a company entrepreneurial incubator park. And both cases were approved unanimously by the university's board. That's quite schizophrenic. We discussed during 8 years, and then there was no controversy because it was unanimous. The decision was unanimous, but it took everyone 8 years to reach this decision. So this event had the proposition of touching on metrics, and so I'd like to just touch on some of these points. What I think about these points. I began my professional life in the 70s, and since then I used to work along the lines and thoughts of triple helix, and a model he used to call the Sabbath. Universities, companies, and government were the three pillars of this triangle to strengthen the innovation capacity. Was used a lot at CEPAL, and since then I read a lot about this, and then I followed on with Henry's launch of the triple helix concept, and he should be congratulated, and all of you, because Henry was able to create an international community of scholars in this subject, and there is already good work about this subject, a lot of work done. Going back to the metrics issue, I watched part of the event yesterday, and yesterday people touched on the metrics of scientific papers co-authored by university members. And so this is very company and university, and also patents were also discussed. Brazil has a part, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Thiago mentioned this in Portugal. This also occurs among the main national patent registrations are from universities. This is, in Brazil, it's practically all of them. And
razões legais.
This is because there are legal reasons and historical reasons for this, but in fact, a patent filed by a university does not really bring about any benefits for society. It may be good for the author, he may frame it and hang it on his or her wall, but the Brazilian Patent Office, but the society will only benefit if that patent is actually used. So, for a more appropriate metric is could be patent, but the more appropriate one would be licenses, products produced. In the case of a company that could produce products from this patent, and then society would gain with job generation, with the production of different products, with the generation of income and taxes. I think these are the main metrics. And there are others, and that result from the work of companies and universities working together. The amount of value of the projects that we observe in these partnerships. When in 2015, there are 120 million reais of contracts signed between the parks companies and university labs. And another idea of metrics is also how many undergraduate and post-graduation, masters and doctorate students actually work in these companies. How many of them create their own companies? How many of these, after they graduate, are actually hired by these companies, and these companies located within the park? So these are metrics. Most of the ones I listed are quantitative ones, but should also coexist with qualitative ones that can measure the cultural change or compliance with the university's culture and the region's culture, the issue of scientific-based entrepreneurship, and this for all areas. In Portuguese and in Spanish, we adopted the technology park when we talk about science park. The technology park gives us a wrong idea that we're only talking about the engineering and the technology and hard sciences. But when we talk about employment and income and taxes and goods for society, we are referring to all the areas. Art, the UFRJ has an enormous participation in Rio de Janeiro's carnival. The samba schools have used for decades professors and students from the Federal University for the preparation of their parades and the shows they put on. And unfortunately, there was no carnival in Rio due to the pandemic. And in closing, two last observations. There is a very serious distortion in Brazil. First of all, because we have a very low number of researchers. Only 1,100 for each million. In Russia, 3,100. In the US, 3,000, 4,000 researchers for 100 million. In Israel, 8,000 research for every million inhabitants. In Brazil, only 700 per 100 million. And our researchers work namely in universities. So in Brazilian culture, to study masters or get your PhD, the whole purpose behind this is to be able to continue working, actually. So we lack universities that can present the importance of research and the importance of having researchers continuing their work, developing new products, new processes. This presents an additional difficulty in order to make this helix turn, the communication between universities and companies, the difficulty in this communication, the research. It has to be someone in the university producing scientific papers, and the company has to produce whatever and sell. And I think that during this pandemic year, it was very hard for the whole world, and more so in Brazil than in other countries. But I think mankind has learned the importance of science and scientifically based innovation. The vaccines that are emerging, they have a name and surname. One is Oxford AstraZeneca. It's a university and a company. When it's not in the name, it's quite certainly in the history of that vaccine, some kind of partnership with a university. So it's of the essence that there be scientific papers and studies and research, basic sciences. Otherwise, there will be no vaccines. But it's of the essence also that there be companies that can communicate and with the academic field and have the motivation to launch vaccines in the market so that we can have vaccines available for society. Francisco, I think that I was able to cover my presentation in my 15 minutes. I already apologize. I'm going to have to leave at 5 to 4. Perhaps I have another appointment. Perhaps I may be able to participate as part of the debate, but I'd like to thank the organizers for the invitation, the opportunity to be here with you.
Thank you. I will pass the floor now to Fernanda. She's the executive president of Brazil Junior and has ample experience in junior companies at the State University of North Fluminense, Darcy Ribeiro University. Fernanda, it's a pleasure to have you with us. It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you. I will now share my screen with you so that you can see my presentation. Just a moment while it uploads. I would like to thank you for this invitation. I would also like to thank all of you who are present here, professors and organizers who have been sharing their experiences. Are you hearing me? Well, okay. The presentation is in English, but I will speak in Portuguese. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the ranking of entrepreneurship universities that we make at Brazil Junior. As I am Fernanda, executive president of Brazil Junior. It is an educational organization helping junior companies that are linked to over 254 junior companies in teaching institutions. And I'm a graduate in engineering, in materials engineering, and I believe very much in this, in the entrepreneurship education that will help us fill in gaps in our youth. And when we talk about this, about university and the context, there is a phrase that says that if Brazil becomes a great power without a great world-class university, it will be the first case in the history of a great country. So university have a fundamental role in our country and in our context. And although we understand the importance of universities, the presence of international university of Brazil in international university rank is still very small. So we start at the 250th position in the higher education ranking. And although we have one of the best performance in the Quaquarelli Siemens ranking, the University of São Paulo was in the 116th position. We still have a long way to advance and to understand the potential of our university. So, the Brazil Junior is a movement of inside Brazilian universities, and the question comes up that how can we change this reality, because we understand that many actions are already happening in Brazil and that we have a great potential to, and we can cooperate. So based on this question, in 2016, a survey of a perception on the characteristics that most contribute to university being more entrepreneurial were answered by more than 4,000 students. From this survey, we developed this concept of an entrepreneurial ecosystem using the opinions of the students, consult, and we start to structure this ranking, our own ranking. And the concept of entrepreneurial university is that these are an academic community inserted in a favorable ecosystem which develops society through innovative practices. So this is the concept of entrepreneurial universities that the ranking uses. The methodology used to design and work on this ranking comes from the holistic framework of entrepreneurial ecosystem developed by Babson College. So this is what we use to develop our own ranking. So the framework has 6 dimensions. We look at the dimensions of extension, of innovation, of entrepreneurial culture, of internationalization, infrastructure, and financial capital. So we managed to develop this methodology in these 6 dimensions, and inside them we developed a series of indicators that we have 5 indicators for 3 indicators for each of them that we can use from the data collected, ranking and attributing grades in order to reach this complete ranking for all our universities that we use for the universities. When we talk about methodology, we also observe that there are 3 specific dimensions that for the definition of indicators: innovation, entrepreneurial culture, and extension. They measure the influence, the degree of entrepreneurship that a university has. When we look at these 3 dimensions, they also present an analogy of our education tripod. So in our university, we have in research, extension, and in teaching, that is included in our constitution, in the Brazilian constitution. So these 3 dimensions are analogous to this. And when we look at the other 3 dimensions, internationalization, financial capital, infrastructure, we see that these 3 dimensions help measure the means. So they show how a university can furnish an ecosystem for the development of entrepreneurship. Here we have a framework more detailed. So how do we look at an entrepreneurial university that develops society and dialogues with the academic community and is inserted in a favorable ecosystem? And from this, we can further detail the 6 axes we have: internationalization, infrastructure, financial capital, entrepreneurial culture, information extension, innovation extension, and in these, we try to develop other indicators that can help us measure what the university, how the universities are performing. So we started with the survey perceptions, and then the methodology evolved and is now composed by 3 main data collection sources. So the perception of students, that is, we have direct collections with the universities that participate supplying data, and we also have a secondary database from other sources like the transparency and website and science website. So these 3 together we use to compose our indicators, the data to be used for indicators. We started in 2016. That was the first edition of the ranking. The second came in 2017. In 2018, we understood that we need to change the strategy of ranking. Instead of being an annual ranking, it would be more interesting to have a biannual ranking, because this would make it. And in 2019, we had the third edition of this ranking. In numbers, in 2016, we started by ranking 42 universities in 17 states. In 2017, we expanded to 55 universities in 20 states, and in 2019, we reached all 27 states and 123 universities. Looking at the results, we had the participation of some special guests, such as Henry Etkowitz, who is the founder of Triple Helix Association, Andreas Schleicher, who was director of communication abilities in OCDE, and we have a speech by Andreas that says that universities face the challenge to be able to represent themselves and to cooperate. And so these are students who were empowered to take decisions and to understand how they could cooperate with higher education in the country, involving themselves in the process. Here we have the top 10 entrepreneurial universities according to the 2019 list. USP, University of São Paulo, and several other universities that are well known in Brazil, and their position under each indicator and the grade for each indicator. I can supply this to you later, showing in detail each pillar and each grade, showing why they reach these grades, so we can see which universities are a reference in each in specific areas. So the thing is not only to measure, but also to share this knowledge. And we have certain universities that are already very strong in certain areas, and we can show how these universities can cooperate to strengthen each other. The impact of the ranking 2019, we have the launch of the Brazilian National Congress in 2019. We had over 160 media presence, counting news channels and TV channels. And we realized there was a realization of a road show all over the country. We went to several universities all over the country presenting our work. And also we had the digitalization of ranking. So we do have a book and a PDF, and we also have an interactive site in which we can work through so that people can have access to our data. So a lot of people are using this data. And also 7 million reais were intended by Brazilian Ministry of Education to best classify public universities. So it's important to say that we show that this ranking is starting to gain credibility from the government, and attracting and drawing public attention. So in this way, we can strengthen the university ecosystem. So this is the first step we have given, and we hope to advance. Here are some of the media attention that we were given. Here are some of our sponsors, Bradesco, that sponsored and believed in our project, and we had the support of several very important companies. So Triple Helix itself and the National USEC department and several councils of higher education and company councils that look at innovation and believe in this. And as for the ranking in 2021, as I said before, we moved to a biannual ranking now. So our last ranking was in 2019, and we are working to launch the 2021 ranking. It's the fourth edition. Probably those people who are now in the university will receive a contact, will be contacted by Brazil Junior, so that they can work together. And just to close, I want to say that Brazil Junior emerged to bring proposals, examples, and clear ideas on how we can improve our universities. How can we, in a network, evolve our training standards and models? So Albert Einstein taught us that it's not the answer that move the world, it's the questions. Therefore, we want to bring new data that will serve as input for our discussions, so that we can have make decisions. Maybe it can be taken to classrooms so that undergraduate committees and in the strategic planning of universities and even in the agendas of government agendas, we can work with innovation and entrepreneurship in all parts of the country. So thank you all very much for your attention. If anyone wants to know a little bit more, please contact me. Here are my contacts on the screen. Thank you.
Ok, Fernanda, muito obrigado.
Thank you, Fernanda.
Vou ficar aguardando aqui,
I am
Mariana, as questões
waiting for
no chat,
Mariana,
tá?
the questions, so that through the chat, so Mariana will pass them on to me. But before going to the questions, I want to, I have a question for everyone who is participating in this panel that I think might lead to some interesting thoughts. Mauricio was talking about COVID and the connection between companies and universities in building solutions for health. And right now, this pandemic has led us to some deep thought. So Thiago talked about ecosystems. We can't nowadays think just inside the walls of a company. We have to think of an articulation of a corporation, of a network of companies too. So I think that maybe it's time to rethink rethink entrepreneurship and innovation, starting from the economic model of the companies. Entrepreneurship, as we see in Stanford, which survives on scale, and you think of this economic model on the level of companies is what has brought us so many crises in the environment. Shouldn't we rethink entrepreneurship? COVID also has made us think a lot on our work, about our work, and we can see how this has been intensified by the way things work now. So I think we have two big crises in the world now: the environmental crisis, that is also related to COVID, and the work crisis that is so central to society. So shouldn't we think of an entrepreneurship on another model on another economic model, sorry, and that wouldn't be based on escalation, but mostly on solving the problems in our society. That's it.
Posso começar, Francisco?
Can I start, Francisco?
Então, eu acho que isso
Well, I think this is a process that is already ongoing.
As empresas B, né, as empresas
the companies
com propósito, né, que associam a finalidade lucrativa
that understand that profit is connected to social and environmental impact, that they already exist. We published a notice at FAPERJ 2 years ago, and again this year we'll have another notice published and about this. And it's true, this has been a year of profound reflection and I think we have a chance now. I'm usually optimistic, but in this case I'm not so optimistic, that we have a chance to rethink its models. Society has this chance to rethink its models. In Brazil, we had a moment of extreme hatred, a level of hatred much above any level we could have imagined, a lack of compassion and solidarity that is all against what you are defending, what I'm defending. So I think it is time for us to start building a more ethical, more solidary society. And we can't continue being such an unequal and unfair country as we are today. And for economy, the perspectives are pretty bad also. So the only sustainable source that we have is actually falling. Is everything is falling apart in what education? There's such a huge gap opening in education in Brazil. So I also dream with this better world, as you say, as you propose. But I confess that I am very doubtful in the case of Brazil that this may happen in a short term. Maybe other countries can pull us up, hopefully, because some countries are finding their way back. That's very positive.
Ok, obrigado, Mauricio.
Okay, thank you, Mauricio.
Devo tomar a palavra, Francisco? Como é que está aí organizado isso?
Should I
Pode
start?
ser, ué.
Vamos lá. Eu vou organizar a minha resposta à sua provocação em duas.
I am going to organize my
Questão dos novos modelos e tal.
answer
Eu acho que tem
in
muita
two parts.
falácia com essas
I think
comparações com os Estados
it is a
Unidos,
fallacy
sabe?
when we make
Há coisa de uns 10
comparisons
anos
with the
atrás, eu tive a
US.
oportunidade
10
de
years
ir
ago, I had
numa
the
conferência da LC
opportunity
lá em Stanford, em 2010, foi
to
lá.
participate in a conference in
Talvez
Stanford.
assim, a conferência mais
Perhaps it
inspiradora
was
da L-Street
the most
Sales. Foi
inspiring triple
muitos
helix
pesados nessa
company.
conferência, né?
There were
Tava
many
minha equipe,
renowned.
tudo bem, mas estava
Henry was there, but
Anhembi Saxenia,
Anil
tava
Saxenia,
pesada
you know,
do
really
sistema falando sobre isso,
very
né?
important
E eu
people
descobri monte de coisa
in
lá.
this
Uma
field.
primeira
And I
coisa
found
que eu
out
vi
many
é que,
things there. The first thing I
apesar
found
das
out was that
transferências da
despite
Universidade de Stanford
the
ter a
Stanford
estratégia
University's
historicamente do
transfer
rádio AM/FM,
office
do
of
DNA recombinante,
AM/FM
do algoritmo do Google,
radio,
apesar disso
Google
tudo, apesar de
algorithm,
Stanford ser uma universidade privada,
despite
tem
all
anuidade
this,
custar
despite being
$50.000,
private,
né?
its
50 mil
annuity is
dólares por ano. Apesar disso
$50,000 per
tudo,
annum. Despite all this,
85% do orçamento da
85%
universidade
of the
vinha do governo.
university's
Isso em
budget
2010.
comes from the
E agora
government.
como
This
está?
in
Então,
2010.
assim, primeira coisa assim,
So
que eu tenho para
the
falar
first
é o
thing
que
that I have to
aconteceu
say
lá
is
não é
what happened
replicável.
there. It
Dois,
cannot
é mentira
can
que
be
dinheiro privado, não é dinheiro privado, é dinheiro público.
imitated. It's
E a
not
parte do dinheiro público vai
only
por dentro da
private
universidade,
money, it
a
is
outra
also
parte vai
public
pelo
money.
setor
Part of it
empresarial,
goes
para as
through the
compras da
university, the other
universidade, né?
part goes
Então,
through
recentemente nós vimos
the
aí
entrepreneurial
NASA
side. So
ir para Marte
NASA
num
going to
helicóptero de 80
Mars, there's a
milhões de dólares,
$80 million
uma
helicopter
aeronavezinha lá de
and a
2,5 bilhões de
aircraft of
dólares, né? Isso tudo
$2.5
foi comprado pelo
billion.
setor privado.
All
E o
this
setor
came from the
privado
private
comprou
sector.
isso
The private
necessariamente para
sector
fazer
acquired
isso, para
this
desenvolver
to
monte de
be able to
tecnologia
produce
e
this. So
não
they
me
made the
surpreenderia
most
se
of
chegasse
a
daqui
lot
uns
of
2, 3
technology,
anos
and it
as
wouldn't
tecnologias
surprise me
do
if in
helicóptero
2-3
de
years'
80
time,
milhões de dólares
the
que foi para
technology of the
Marte
$80 million
tivesse
helicopter that went to Mars
insumos da Amazon, que por sua
is
vez vai
found in
comprar
all
dos
Amazon
Correios brasileiros e
drones,
outros correios
who
para fazer as entregas através de
in
drones.
their turn
Então,
will
esse arranjo, essa coisa,
buy
né, que eu falei dos
Brazilian
emaranhados, que eu falei
postal
rapidamente aqui,
services
ele não
and
se repete,
what
é uma
have you.
coisa que não
So
se
this is
repete, né?
something that
E
is
aí eu
not
vou para a segunda
repeated. And
parte da
so
minha
I go to the
resposta.
second part
O
of my answer.
sistema, ele não
The
é
system
desenhado para
is
países
not
como o Brasil
designed
fazendo o que
for
adianta.
countries
Tem uma
like
ordem
Brazil to
internacional
catch
nisso,
up.
a gente não
There's
está
an
com nada.
international order.
Se
We're not in
jogasse,
a
eu não
void.
gosto dessas comparações, mas se
I don't
jogasse no
like
nosso
these.
dia a dia,
If we
na
bring this to our
economia e tal,
daily
o conceito de meritocracia serve
meritocracy,
para
and
país também.
this
É uma
concept
mentira
also
que nós
serves for the
devemos todos
country. It's a
tributar para
lie
dar
that
tudo
if we do
certo.
our homework,
Isso é mentira.
everything
O
will work
sistema
out.
é
That's not
feito
true.
para
The
existir
system
países
was made
subdesenvolvidos e para
so that
existirem
there be
países desenvolvidos.
underdeveloped
E nós
countries and
estamos
developed
no sistema
countries.
do
And
lado
we are in
dos
this
países
system
subdesenvolvidos e não dos desenvolvidos.
together with the
Vez ou outra
underdeveloped
acontece uma
countries.
quebra dessa ordem
And
por um
every
achismo.
now and then there is a rupture in this order and we see a China emerge, but it's only every now and then. And so on the other side, on the other hand, I really enjoyed my colleague from Kenya's lecture. It's a pity he could no longer be with us. The largest electronic payment system that we have news of in the underdeveloped world emerged in Kenya in 2007, in a country where many people do not even have a bank account, started paying things via SMS. And this reached over 10 million clients in a very short period of time. It was then acquired by Vodafone, and it's a fantastic case. And this colleague was saying that their strategy is to deal with social issues. And in Brazil, we've lost this opportunity. We missed it. And so I'm going to give you the example that I gave, which I read in a doctorate thesis, that they analyzed the social development policies in the Labour Party's governments. Why did Minha Casa Minha Vida did not acquire Brazil to make Brazil the leader in popular housing? Why was it just a system for building conventional houses? And why wasn't technology brought into this? Any distribution program of basic stipend program, basic basket. I mean, if we bring our social policies with our science and technology potential that we have, not only in the field of health, but other areas, we could envision a much better application and a much greater potential. Francisco, could you just give me a minute? I want to say farewell. I have another engagement. I'd like to thank the organizers once again. I'd like to greet Thiago. I haven't seen him for some time. It's a pleasure to have met new friends. I am available to all of you at the university. It was a pleasure to see you once again, Mauricio. Good to see you again. Fernanda, Juan, would you like to say anything? Hi, Francisco. I feel very happy with what was mentioned and discussed before, but seconding Mauricio, I believe that in a certain way, things are changing in this sense. So there are some concepts that start mixing up with entrepreneurship and awareness, raising awareness. And when we see that there are companies analyzing environment and social and governance aspects, when there are other concepts that are, and companies that are being aware of these concepts, how can we potentialize this? And so these concepts were perhaps more shy in other parts, and we can think about how we can improve this, and together with this entrepreneurship that we're trying to leverage. Okay, Fernanda. Juan, would you like to say anything?
I think all the problems are the same.
Acho que os problemas são todos os mesmos aqui da América Latina. Acho que o progresso com a hélice tríplice ganha muito com esse tipo de reunião, porque nos deparamos com os mesmos problemas e vemos frequentemente a tentativa de uso das mesmas soluções. Atualmente estamos no meio de uma pandemia e sabemos que é a pandemia, sabemos que há algumas questões são baratas. Sabemos que temos que ter 7 milhões de pessoas vacinadas. Eu acho que as vacinas, ele está se referindo às vacinas. É uma exigência social, uma necessidade médica, e podemos dar as mãos às pessoas que necessitam. Mas precisamos ter 2 pacotes. Eu acho que é um momento especial para todo mundo e temos que mudar. E sabemos que temos que reunir os esforços de todos que estão trabalhando nesse sentido. Mas, às vezes, são coisas sociais que precisamos. Um outro ponto que eu gostaria de tocar é como é que podemos fazer essa união, como é que podemos ter a união de todos os hélices, tríplices, uma união das empresas, do governo e da academia. Como é que podemos incentivar o meio acadêmico para estar no meio desse tipo de coisa? Eu espero que irão se juntar nesse tipo de encontro, de congresso, para podermos solucionar nossos problemas. Eu gostaria de agradecer a Marisa, agradecer o Francisco, o Thiago, Fernanda, e, infelizmente, aqueles que já tiveram que sair. Muito obrigado, foi um prazer. Obrigado, Juan. Okay, folks, I think there is one question here still remaining about how to achieve more things for social achievements. But since we are already running late, I'll just give you the floor to hear your closing remarks about this and about our panel on the entrepreneurial university. I will begin, and then our colleague Juan may close, and Fernanda can speak after me. This is another interesting question also in our internal chat here. How are patent data raised that have been licensed? Somebody asked us this in our chat. I don't know whether there is somebody in the public at large that is interested in this. Before giving my final remarks, I would just like to touch on this point. Somebody asked this, and the issue is precisely this. This is the difficulty. The data are not made available. And so we believe that in the capitalist world, there is a whole bunch of people making loads of money, but it's not. If we had the data at hand and the winner product at hand, you would. The same thing is with the patents. Something that the forms of intellectual property that all universities have to fill out and hand over to the Ministry of Science and Technology and Education. And I refer to the MIT, the case of MIT. They have the patent of recombinant DNA, AM, FM, radio AM, FM, Google algorithm, and that's not even a fraction of the investment made there. So it's very hard to obtain these data. I disagree with the use of patents as a metric. A patent only works in given sectors, specific sectors. There are some sectors where patents aren't really that important, such as the software one. So patents are important when you're doing a sectorial analysis. Then I think it's worthwhile when you want to analyze just one sector. But if you want to analyze university, I don't think it's worthwhile. A second point in answer to your question, Francisco, how can we draw investment to the social? No, we don't do this. It's the system that does that. So once you have, carbon credit and this or that, there's going to be a credit for social responsibility. Once you monetize these things, only then are we able to attract this money. But in my opinion, that is not the solution, because you are getting the rationale that generates the problem and embedding it in the solution. I think we have to change the rationale. And like Mauricio and perhaps you, I haven't been very optimistic, because before the pandemic, we were already not doing so well. And what do I mean by that? We had already seen Brexit. The European Union was breaking down. Iran had bombed the main, Saudi Arabia's main oil refinery, a maximum embargo against Iran. Brazil thinking in a potential conflict with the French Guianas opposing Madrid. So that was in the strategic plan of the Brazilian army, the greatest potential enemy of Brazil in 20 years down the road would be France. I mean, so things weren't doing at all well. And there's no evidence that the pandemic will facilitate these agreements that created all this instability. So there are no more agreements. So the UN, NATO, International Labor Organization, it's all, they've all been disrupted, and we have to build a new world order, I think. So perhaps that we are moving toward even rougher waters without wanting to be a pessimistic, but being pessimistic all the same, because the agreement is ended and there is no other agreement in the horizon. Now, in closing, I'd like to say that despite all this, the universities and the environment of knowledge generation in Brazil is a very rich one. It is a country that produced a Paulo Freire, a Milton Santos, just two Black Brazilians who did not come from upper Brazilian classes, but that had different points of view. I think that this may be our potential through social inclusion, change the research agendas or create more adherent research agendas to our particularities. We are a former slave society. We had contact with people that were still alive. I have pictures of myself on my great-grandfather's lap, and he was born the year that slavery was abolished in Brazil. So there are many Black Brazilians that are descendants from slaves. And so this is different from what happens in Argentina, not to mention the US or France or the UK. So we have to work with our realities, what we see, and have technology service in this sense. And the metrics I point to this are the metrics that will, in fact, reveal the most relevant projects for this future, that everything points to a future that will present a rupture and a collapse. So to place the system to serve our diseases. That's it, Francisco. Thank you once again. Thank you, Fernanda. Juan, it was a pleasure to be here with you, and thank the audience, all of you who are still connected here with us. Fernanda, I'm just going to make some closing remarks. First of all, I was very pleased with this invitation, and it shows that there are people gathered here that are working toward a common objective to improve education, educational system, and higher education system, and the people who are watching and listening in who have the same purpose to enhance their knowledge. So my closing remarks sort of goes along this line. I have seen many communities, and I have seen the work of people who have done this. So we as a community, as people who have similar objectives, may think and undertake joint projects so that our academia and our higher education become more entrepreneurial, and that we are able to share our best practices and our experiences. And I'm sure that we all have diverse and very profound experiences in our different areas of expertise and of work. So I'd like to thank. I have another engagement now, but I was very happy to be here with you.
Juan.
Thank you, Fernanda. Juan?
Tá fechado o microfone, Juan.
Juan, you are muted. Your microphone is muted. Please, can you unmute your phone, your microphone? Right, good.
Thanks, Raul. I have a pleasure
First,
to be
primeiro que tudo,
a group of
é um grande prazer estar com um grupo de pessoas
pushing the
que estão
innovation, pushing
todos juntos, promovendo a inovação, promovendo o que chamamos da Triple Helix. Obrigado por se juntarem todos agora para essa conferência e gostaria de dizer, Francisco, que foi uma excelente troca de ideias, Fernanda.
Onesmus, and I was very happy to be in this event.
E foi uma felicidade participar desse evento. Eu agradeço aqui do Peru e agora
my words to my rector. I'm a director here to
eu
very much for all.
O tradutor pede desculpas, picotou o áudio e não foi possível traduzir perfeitamente. Thank you, Juan. Thank you, Thiago. Thank you, Fernanda. Greetings to all. Goodbye.
Tchau, tchau, pessoal.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.